Good night. Welcome to this silent journey through the past, where shadows have stories to tell. Today, we're going to explore a world where darkness wasn't just the absence of light. It was a veil that hid secrets, fears, and mysteries. The medieval night, with its ancient superstitions and fears, still whispers to us through the centuries. Take a deep breath. Feel the light night air enveloping you. Let stillness take over. As the candle flame dances softly, imagine yourself in an ancient village where the crackling of the fire in the fireplace is the only sound, apart from the wind passing through the trees. Here, people looked into the darkness with watchful eyes and wary hearts, for they knew that in the shadows something might be waiting. But they also knew that light, no matter how small, could drive away fear. In this long story, we will walk together through the beliefs, rituals, and objects that kept evil at bay. Let's get to know the voices of the past that tried to understand the inexplicable. And perhaps, in the end, you can close your eyes with a new sense of peace, understanding, and lightness. So, let's get started. In the Middle Ages, day and night were rhythms that marked much more than the simple passage of time. The sun was setting, and a different world was beginning to awaken. Not a world of light, but a realm of shadows. For the residents of the towns and villages, the night was a time of silence and mystery. Without the electric light, without powerful flashlights, the darkness was deep, almost palpable. The starry sky shone, but the earth seemed to swallow everything in its black mantle. And with the darkness came fear. Not just fear of thieves or wild animals, but something much older and more intangible, the fear of the invisible. It was a fear that dwelt in the soul, in the silence, in the wind that whispered through the barely closed windows. To the people of that time, the world was inhabited by forces that could not be seen, but could feel. Restless spirits, hungry demons, ghosts that roamed among the living. The night was the time of these creatures. They were as real as the fire in the hearth and as dangerous as the storm that destroyed the harvest. Therefore, each house, each room was surrounded by small rituals and protections, simple gestures which carried a deep hope that by scaring away evil, the family could sleep peacefully. And so, the night was not just an interval between days, but an invisible battlefield where good and evil vied for their place. But how did these fears manifest themselves? And what forms did the protections take against what could not be seen? Let's find out together. The Middle Ages were profoundly marked by religion. For almost everyone, the Christian faith was the foundation of life, morals, and also of understanding the invisible world. Evil was often interpreted as a manifestation of the devil, an active, real force that sought to corrupt souls and spread suffering. Rituals and beliefs were not just superstitions. They were tools of spiritual protection. Priests and monks dedicated their lives to fighting these forces, and the faithful resorted to prayers, blessings, and sacraments to maintain divine protection. The sign of the cross, a simple gesture, was charged with power. Passing an object or even a person under the blessing was an act of warding off evil. The churches, with their bells that rang at dawn and dusk, marked the moments when the spiritual battle intensified. In addition, reliquaries containing bones or objects of saints were seen as shields against the devil. Many carried with them small blessed amulets, seeking the protective presence of the saints. But this relationship between faith and fear was not without contradictions. Sometimes what was considered protection for some generated suspicion for others. The stories of witches, heresies, and curses were always close at hand. The line between protection and threat was blurred, and fear could easily turn into persecution. In this scenario, superstitions were also born from the desire to understand and control what seemed uncontrollable. Faith was a light in the dark, but it could also cast long, deep shadows.
If prayer was the invisible force, objects were the visible defense. Those who feared what the night brought sought, with what they had in hand, to create barriers against the unknown. One of the most common items was salt. Simple, easy to find, and deeply symbolic. Salt purified, preserved, and, it was believed, prevented evil forces from crossing the threshold of the house. It was spread in the corners of rooms, left on door frames, and sometimes mixed with water to create an improvised sacred liquid. Mothers put small pinches under the children's pillows. Shepherds smeared salt over the foreheads of newborn lambs. In times of plague or misery, salts became a symbolic shield, a line on the ground between life and the invisible. Another item surrounded by fear and respect was the mirror. Rare and expensive, but shrouded in mystery. It was said that the mirror could capture a soul. When someone died, the mirrors in the house were immediately covered with black cloths or turned to the wall. If the soul saw its reflection, she might not leave. For this reason, some families kept their mirrors wrapped in fabric even when there was no mourning. Better to prevent, better to avoid the gaze of something that was there, observing back. In addition, there were the holy objects, small and large, hand-carved wooden crosses, medals of saints, rosary beads made from seeds or bone. In the poorest regions, it was common to improvise. A piece of fabric with a handwritten prayer rolled up and sewn to the garment, or a small cross made of 2 sticks tied with red thread. It was not the beauty of the object that counted, but the faith with which it was made. These symbols were worn around their necks, fastened to the bed, or fixed above doors and windows. Many believed that witches' hair, long tangled strands found in the field, could be curled and burned as a form of protection. Even the wood itself had meanings. Knock on wood, it drove away bad luck. An ancient tradition inherited from pagan times, but which has survived strongly. People didn't have much, but the little they had, they transformed into shields against the invisible. A pinch of salt, a cross on the wall, a midnight prayer. Small gestures, who built a symbolic wall against what the eyes did not see, but what the heart felt.
The medieval night was not empty. For those who lived under the dark sky, it was full of presences, and few of them were welcome. The stories passed by word of mouth, by the fire, told of creatures that prowled the roads and fields after sunset. One of the most feared was demons, not as caricatures, but as subtle, cunning forces. They did not always appear in monstrous form. Sometimes they came as shadows, voices that whispered in the darkness. Other times as dreams, nightmares so vivid that they were believed to be royal visits. Demons, according to the priests of the time, could pass through open windows, unlocked doors, or even enter through the distracted mind. Therefore, impure thoughts before bed were dangerous. They opened breaches. They left room for temptation to enter. But the demons were not alone in this nocturnal world. There were also the ghosts, the souls that had not rested. They could be victims of violent death, sinners who had not repented, or simply those forgotten by their families. Many believed that if a soul did not receive prayers, it wandered. He called by the name of the living, or he appeared in dreams asking for help. For this reason, it was common for medieval families to pray not only for themselves before going to sleep, but for all the dead in the village. And then there were the witches. They inhabited an even more liminal space, between fear and desire, between the real and the imagined. They were women who knew herbs, knew how to read signs, or simply lived in isolation. Often, they were nothing more than midwives or healers, but at night, in the stories told in a low voice, they were transformed into terrible beings. It was believed that they could fly on hazel branches, meet on Sabbaths with the devil himself, or cast curses with their eyes. The fear of witches was so great that entire villages watched the behavior of their older, poorer, or simply freer women. All it took was one misfortune, a bad harvest, a sick child, for a suspicion to be born, and with it, fear. In addition, the medieval night world was populated by werewolves, cursed cats, headless black dogs, pale women who sang in the forests, dark fairies who stole children. Yes, even the fairies, for in the older tales, they were not delicate creatures. They were otherworldly beings who could bless or curse with equal ease. These figures did not live only in legends. They inhabited the collective subconscious. They were present in every noise out of turn, every branch that cracked, each candle that suddenly went out. In the Middle Ages, fear did not need form to be real. The suggestion was enough. The darkness was enough.
In times of uncertainty and darkness, medieval people resorted not only to the formal faith of the churches, but also to popular knowledge passed down from generation to generation as silent inheritances. In every corner of Europe, in every village forgotten between hills, there were simple and powerful gestures, rituals that tried to protect the body and soul from the invisible. One of the most common was the sign of the cross, but it wasn't just done on the chest. There were those who traced it in the air, over the crib of a child, or on the bed before bedtime, or even over the door itself at nightfall. In the villages of Germania, many drew crosses with charcoal on the doorframe. In times of plague, they wrote old Latin words such as Christus mentionem benedicat in chalk or ink. These sacred words were more than decorations. They were shields. In the Iberian Peninsula, there was a tradition of lighting a white candle not only to illuminate, but to hold the soul in the body, as the elders said. The continuous light of the candle drove away the wandering entities. On stormy nights, it was common to cover mirrors, close all the windows, and light sprigs of rue or rosemary, herbs that, according to popular knowledge, smelled bad to the devil. The smoke of the herbs, as it rose, carried the prayers of the righteous and cleansed the air from the presence of spirits. Words also had power. There were whispered prayers in ancient dialects which only the elders knew by heart. They were called closed prayers or secret prayers. Not just anyone was taught. It was necessary to deserve it. And according to tradition, those who learned them, he always slept peacefully. Another common practice was the use of personal amulets, pieces of parchment with Bible verses, small cloth bags with consecrated cemetery soil, medals of Saint Benedict or Saint Michael, the great combatant of demons. In the Celtic regions, pierced stones were used to see the world beyond. They were hung above the bed as protection against the nightmare, a spirit that was believed to sit on people's chests as they slept, taking their breath away. Some left a glass of water and a knife next to the bed. The water attracted the spirit. The knife prevented him from climbing. Even the animals had their protections, spiritual vaccines made with prayers and herbs, and dogs with blessed collars to guard the limits of the house. There was no single kind of faith, but there was only one desire: to sleep in peace, live a new dawn.
The Middle Ages were a time of uncertainty, famines, pestilences, wars, sudden deaths. Life was fragile, and the night, it was the mirror of this fragility. When the world darkened and silence set in, everything that had been suppressed during the day, fears, pains, guilt, regrets, came back to the surface. And so superstitions and rituals were not just religious or folkloric beliefs. They were also emotional mechanisms, mental survival tools. Fear, when not named, grows, but when he is wrapped up in a story, a demon, a witch, a spirit, he becomes understandable. It takes shape, and that which has form can be fought. So many of these gestures, such as lighting a candle, saying a prayer, covering a mirror, brought relief. They created a sense of control in the midst of chaos. The ritual brought order. The habit brought comfort. The repetition, night after night, worked as an anchor, like the old pillow that makes us feel at home, like an invisible lullaby. And fear, as old as it is a deeply human feeling. Today, we call it nocturnal anxiety, but in those days, it was called presence, as if something was there, something I observed that weighed down, that took away sleep. The answer to this was to surround oneself with symbols, create a safe space where the body could relax and the soul trust. This reminds us of something important. Medieval spirituality was not just doctrine, it was also care. Take care of your home, your mind, your sleep. When covering a mirror, not only one spirit was removed, the fear that the soul would be trapped in the reflection of a life that was passing was covered. When praying for a loved one did not follow just one tradition. He said silently, "You are with me. You still live here." These practices did not cure fear, but they taught him how to live with him, sleeping even with him at the door, trusting that the light would return as it always did with the sunrise.
In the Middle Ages, a story could span centuries. It didn't have to be written. It was enough to be told. Many of these stories were born from real events: an unexplained death, a strange animal, a premonitory dream, and, over time, gained the contours of legend. Let's get to know some of these old voices, which time has not erased. The Ghost of Byland Abbey. In the region of Yorkshire, England, around the 14th century, the monks of Byland Abbey began to record nocturnal visits of apparitions. Accounts told of a figure covered by a sheet, not as in modern tales, but as a body wrapped in a shroud. It appeared between the columns of the church at night. He didn't speak. He just walked, moaned, and disappeared. One of the monks, frightened, decided to face the apparition and asked, "Why don't you rest?" The figure replied, "I was buried without confession. My soul is trapped, restless. I need masses to be said for me. After several celebrations dedicated to the anonymous soul, the figure did not appear again. The Suffolk Black Dog. In 1577, during a storm in the village of Bongay, Suffolk, a church was struck by lightning. But what the faithful swore they saw was no ordinary lightning bolt. They said that in the midst of the smoke and thunder appeared a huge black dog with red eyes, shiny fur, and teeth like iron. The animal ran between the pews and killed 2 men instantly and disappeared through the wall. The same dog appeared in another neighboring village at exactly the same time. Since then, the Black Shuck has become a legend in the region, a creature associated with sudden death and demonic pacts. Many believed that the sighting was an omen of impending doom. The Lady Who Sings in the Woods. In Bohemia, there was talk of a woman dressed in white who appeared on the trails between the fields. She didn't speak, sang. Her singing was sad, sweet, and hypnotic. Whoever heard it was tempted to follow her, and those who followed her, he got lost. They said she was the spirit of a girl who died waiting for a love that never came back from the war. Her wails never ceased, and she wandered night after night among the oaks, looking for someone who would listen to her to the end. Mothers warned their children, "If you hear a song at night, cover your ears and keep walking." The Witch of Triora. In the 16th century, in the mountain village of Triora, Italy, a devastating drought caused the people to start looking for culprits. And soon his eyes turned to the older women of the village. Among them, a lady named Catarina da Mula, known for healing with herbs and prayers. It was said that at night, blue smoke came out of her chimney, and that her cats did not eat ordinary meat, and that during a cursed harvest, she had smiled. That was enough. She was taken to prison. She confessed under torture that she flew on full moon nights, and that she kissed the devil under a dry fig tree. The village was never the same again. Until this day, Triora is known as the Witch Village. These stories, told in a low voice, had a purpose. They taught, they protected, and at the same time, they helped the people deal with their deepest fears. Because sometimes by putting fear into words, it becomes less heavy, less lonely.
The beliefs of the Middle Ages did not live only in people's hearts. They were engraved on the wood of the doors, on the design of the villas, on the arrangement of the rooms. The fear of the invisible shaped the visible world. Let's start with the house, the place of refuge par excellence. But for this refuge to be safe, it had to obey certain codes. The doors, for example, were more than entrances. They were spiritual barriers. Many homes had small symbols carved on top of the frame: crosses, spirals, sacred letters, six-pointed stars. In the Alpine regions, it was common to find above the door a tau, the T-shaped cross, a symbol of Franciscan protection. At the front doors, the jambs were sometimes smeared with oil mixed with herbs. The thresholds were sealed with salt or chalk on specific nights, such as All Saints' Eve. Inside the house, the position of the furniture also obeyed beliefs. The bed was never to be directly facing the door, as it was said that this allowed for the direct entrance of souls. It was what they called the door of the dead. Mirrors could not be in front of the bed, so as not to steal the spirit during sleep. Many homes had a small niche in the wall with a candle, a cross, or an image of a saint. The sing was called the watchman of the soul. It was there that people prayed before going to sleep. There, the names of the deceased of the family were placed, written on pieces of parchment or wood. The windows also had their rules. At night, they should be covered with thick fabrics, not just against the cold, but to prevent outside glances. For it was believed that wandering spirits could look within and cling to the house. Medieval villages, in turn, were surrounded by walls, but not only for fear of invasion. Many of these walls had gates that closed at sunset. It was a symbolic separation between the world of light and the world of darkness. At the top of the doors, a bell hung. Called the angel's bell, it was rung at dusk. It was believed that the sound drove away evil spirits and announced the divine presence. Even fountains and wells were consecrated with blessings, for water could bear the sorrow of the dead. In many regions, it was customary to throw a small coin into the well before night. It was a symbolic offering, a request for protection of the spirit of the place. In peasant villages, animals were also included in protection. Stables had crosses carved in the rafters, and at the birth of a calf, the peasant traced a sign of a cross on the animal's forehead with ashes from the hearth. The very architecture of churches reflected this division between light and shadow. The large ogival windows allowed light to penetrate, a clear metaphor for God's presence. And it was not uncommon to find on the outer walls of churches grotesque gargoyles. They weren't just decorative. According to belief, they scared evil spirits. It was the ugly driving away the evil. These elements show something profound. Medieval fear was not passive. It expressed itself, organized itself, faced itself with stone, wood, symbols, and fire. Spirituality was in the space, and the space, it was shaped to welcome the soul and protect the body, even in the dark.
You may think that these beliefs are behind you, which belong only to a distant time of candles and parchments. But look closer, and you will see that the echo of these superstitions still lives on, in the gestures, in the sayings, in the habits that we repeat without realizing it. When we knock on wood to ward off bad luck, when we avoid going under stairs, when we make a sign of the cross before leaving the house, or when we put a glass of water next to a child's bed, we are repeating centuries of protection, centuries of fear, and of faith. The use of modern amulets, such as scapulars, medals of saints, crystals, or patouas, is not very different from those small reliquaries sewn into the clothes of medieval peasants. Even in homes, the old habits persist. Mirrors outside the bedroom, plants like snake plant to cut bad energy, water with coarse salt, cinnamon sticks at the door. In countries with Christian roots, candles are still lit in times of loss. Little cups of water are still left for the spirits in peace. Lights are still turned on at night so that the house does not get too dark. And in difficult times, the age-old custom of asking for prayer for soul still survives, even on social media, even in the comments of a video, because the pain still wants to be relieved, the loss still wants to be shared, and the fear still wants to be calmed. Basically, we haven't changed that much. We still seek the light. We still want to sleep in peace. We still fear what we don't see. And at the same time, we feel that there is something there. Modernity has exchanged candles for lamps, the prayers through text messages. But the desire is the same: to be protected, to be welcomed, to feel that there is a good presence on our side when the lights go out. The world has changed, but the soul, it still carries the same old wires, and these wires connect us to those that came before, to those who faced the dark with a lighted candle and a psalm on their lips. Superstition, perhaps, is not ignorance. Maybe it's just memory. Memory that one day we were also afraid, and we survived.
And now that the last candle goes out, everything is silent. We crossed the shadows of the medieval night together. We walked paths where fear was part of life, but also where faith, care, and small gestures built invisible fortresses. Between salt and prayers, between stories of witches and ghosts, we saw that human beings have always sought consolation. He always looked for a way to name fear so that he would cease to dominate. In the end, what did we find? People like us, hearts that feared but loved, souls who wept but prayed, people who, even without knowing what was beyond the darkness, nevertheless lit a candle. Maybe that's what remains after all. The reminder that as long as there is someone willing to keep a little light on, nothing is lost. Now, let the silence come. Take a deep breath. Feel your body lighter. Maybe you want to close your eyes, or simply listen to the silence between words. Be that as it may tonight be yours. May your rest be deep, and that, even in dreams, you remember every shadow, it only exists because there is light. Sleep well, and until the next vigil, Thank you.